The gates of the Harrington estate swung open onto a world where everything looked perfect from the outside. The wide driveway led to a big white house with tall columns and a lawn that seemed to be trimmed every single morning. It was the kind of place people in Connecticut would slow down for, just to admire how put together it all was. But for Emily, who had spent her whole childhood behind those gates, the place always felt cold. Every silent glance, every smile that never quite reached the eyes, it all reminded her that she didn't really belong, no matter what anyone said. Neighbors and visitors always spoke in hushed tones about how the Harringtons stood for American tradition and old-school generosity. But for Emily, those carefully chosen words and the endless polite gestures felt like invisible walls. There was always a way you were supposed to speak, a way you were supposed to stand, and a whole list of unwritten rules about what stories were safe to tell. And it seemed, a whole set of expectations she would never be able to reach. The house was supposed to protect her, but instead it became a stage, one put together just to keep up an image for the rest of the town. Every day, Emily felt the truth. Real warmth was missing, replaced by rules and icy stares. Emily's adoption had been the subject of whispers in the local paper and polite applause at the country club. The Harringtons made sure everyone in Fairfield knew they'd opened their home to a little girl in need. It had come just months after an embarrassing business scandal involving Mr. Harrington that nearly ruined his standing in town. Suddenly, adopting Emily became not just their charitable act, but also their ticket back into Connecticut society's good graces. At every fundraiser and dinner party, Mrs. Harrington mentioned Emily, always with perfect timing, always as her family's proof that they were good, generous people. But once the doors were closed and the news had faded, things went back to their quiet, distant rhythm. Emily quickly realized that her place in the house was mostly for show. She wore the Harrington name, and had her own room with crisp monogrammed linens, but she was never truly invited to be part of the family. Every dinner, she sat a little away from the others, spoken to only when required. The affection she got was practiced: polite hugs at holidays, a pat on the back if someone else was watching. After a while, Emily stopped reaching out for more. It became easier just to be silent and move through the routines that kept everyone else satisfied. Growing up, Emily's life was woven with all these strange contradictions. She wore uniforms from the best private schools in Connecticut, with their polished hallways and strict honor codes. The teachers always praised her work and sometimes even compared her grades to those of the Harrington siblings, Tyler and Claire. But while Tyler and Claire had their photos hung in the foyer, smiling after every tennis tournament or charity event, Emily's awards and report cards were quietly tucked away in a drawer. At recitals or science fairs, she was ushered out after the applause, never asked to pose for family pictures or stand on stage with the rest. Home was even more complicated. Tyler and Claire had grown up hearing about how important the Harrington family was to the town. They knew which fork to use at dinner and which stories to repeat at every 4th of July barbecue. To them, Emily was more like a social experiment, something their parents had done once, to fix the family name. It felt like she was always just outside the inner circle. The message was unspoken, but she understood it early on. Keep your head down, be thankful for what you receive, and never expect to belong in the same way. Being grateful wasn't enough. She was expected to be invisible, too. As Emily moved into adulthood, she figured out that keeping quiet could actually give her a kind of power. Instead of picking fights with her adoptive parents or her siblings when she felt ignored, she poured her energy into her classes and whatever part-time job she could manage with her busy schedule. Behind the scenes at home, Emily started noticing the estate's finances were a mess. Bills stacked up, letters from contractors left unopened, and an old accountant who rarely returned calls. Without ever announcing it, she began sorting everything out, organizing paperwork, setting up online accounts, and negotiating payment plans. While everyone else floated by, trusting that the Harrington name would solve problems forever, Emily made sure nothing truly fell apart. Quietly building a life for herself, she launched Open Sky, a non-profit that aimed to give practical help and mentorship to kids who felt overlooked. Kids who, deep down, reminded her a bit of herself. Open Sky didn't get front-page stories or big galas, but it changed lives in steady, unseen ways. That's how she met Rachel, a volunteer who didn't seem interested in surface-level things. Rachel listened closely, asked about Emily's dreams, and saw through the polite small talk to the real person beneath. For Emily, this was new. Someone actually understood her for who she was, not who she was supposed to be. The first time Emily and Rachel really talked was at a technology conference in Boston, held in one of those huge glass buildings where everything echoed and people barely looked up from their phones. Emily had hesitated before going, unsure if anyone there would get what she was trying to do with open sky, but Rachel spotted her at a table in the back, away from the buzz. They started chatting about why they'd come. Neither of them cared much about networking or swapping business cards. What they really wanted was to meet someone who understood how it felt to be an outsider, always circling the edges while everyone else fit right in. The sense of connection was almost immediate, built from sharing what it means to look for genuine purpose in rooms full of small talk. Over the next few months, their friendship turned into something more. They fell into a rhythm that felt easy, honest, and real, something Emily had never known, especially not under the watchful Harrington roof. She never brought Rachel to those family events or holidays, not because she was ashamed, but because she knew the Harringtons would only judge and probably try to control everything. When Emily and Rachel finally married, it was a small ceremony by the water in Maine. There were no relatives from her old life, just a few friends and the quiet promise that this time, everything would be different. As the years went by, the Harrington family's financial problems only got worse. Bad investments piled up, old businesses closed, and pretty soon the stories of the Harrington fortune became more rumor than fact. Strangely enough, behind closed doors, they started to rely more and more on Emily, the very person they rarely talked about outside of their choreographed family gatherings. She kept her distance, but she knew enough about their habits to spot trouble before it was made public. When a bank threatened to foreclose on one of the properties, Emily used her savings to pay off the overdue mortgage without anyone ever knowing it was her. If a vendor called about unpaid bills, she handled it anonymously through one of her organizations. None of the Harringtons knew the true source of their quiet rescues. Emily wasn't hoping for a thank you. She wanted, at most, a clean break with the past, a way to close off the old debts that seemed to haunt her just as much as the family estate. She sometimes wondered if somewhere in all those sacrifices, her family might see her differently, maybe finally give her credit for holding things together. But year after year, the estate looked exactly the same, untouched, elegant, and completely removed from the real person quietly keeping it alive. The final straw came with a glossy envelope that arrived in Emily's mailbox one late spring afternoon. It was an invitation to the Fairfield Gala, a grand affair thrown to celebrate what the Harringtons liked to call their legacy of generosity. Emily had been the person who handled every detail in the background, booking the venue along the Charles River, coordinating with caterers, handling a mountain of emails that nobody else bothered to answer. Still, when the invitations went out and the website went live, her name was nowhere to be found. The program listed Tyler and Claire as hosts, beaming in posed photos, while Emily's role was described vaguely as support staff. Even the staff badges were handed out with a polite smile, hers marked with the word coordinator in block letters. For years, she had pushed her pride aside and convinced herself that her work meant something. But seeing herself reduced to a background figure, erased from the history of the very event she held together, stung in a way she hadn't expected. When she brought it up that afternoon, the response from her family was cold and rehearsed. "Emily, honestly, not everything is about you," Claire had said, barely looking up from her phone. Their father called her ungrateful, while Tyler asked why she was making such a big scene. That night, alone in her apartment, Emily sat with her disappointment until it became something sharper, heavier. The truth she had been avoiding was clear now, and she realized it was finally time to stop letting the past control her future. On the morning of the Fairfield Gala, the old Riverside Hall seemed to sparkle in the sunlight, like nothing could go wrong inside those polished walls. Emily could feel the weight of what the place meant, even as she slipped into the crisp black uniform she had been told to wear, the one that made her blend in with the catering staff instead of the family she had spent her life trying to help. It was strange, after all she had done to hold things together behind the scenes, to realize that this uniform was the only official recognition she would ever get. Around noon, sleek black town cars started pulling up to the entrance, unloading guests in tailored suits and designer dresses. Emily watched from behind the welcome table as Tyler and Claire practiced their speeches one last time, repeating lines about community, compassion, and how much their family had given back. The room filled with careful handshakes and laughter that seemed hollow if you listened too close. Every once in a while, someone from the family would snap their fingers to get her attention. "Emily, did you double-check the place cards? Or make sure Senator Williams' table gets the special wine?" No one looked her in the eye except to give an order or reassure themselves everything was under control. Emily moved quietly through it all, knowing she was as invisible as ever. The evening dragged on, and Emily kept to her tasks, answering to every command and trying not to let the sting of it get to her. All it took was a small accident. A guest's careless elbow knocked a glass off the edge of a table. The crash echoed through the hall, stopping conversations for a moment. Emily hurried over with a towel, kneeling to pick up the sharp pieces. As she did, her Uncle David spotted her. He grinned and, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, joked about Emily never being good for much except cleaning up other people's messes. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. It stung more because people tried to hide it behind their wine glasses, pretending not to enjoy the joke at her expense. A thin line of blood welled up on Emily's hand where a shard had caught her skin, and the pain almost made her drop the towel. But she forced herself to stand, pocketed the broken glass, and nodded, refusing to let the humiliation show. She vanished to the back room to wash her hand, just as she'd always done, patching herself up without help, smoothing over wounds for the sake of the family's reputation. Yet, as she dried her hand and looked in the mirror, she felt something new was coming, a sense that tonight's embarrassment would not be the last cruelty arranged for her. Not long after Emily returned to the main hall, the lights dimmed a little, and people turned their attention to the stage. It was time for the Harrington family's special presentation, which Claire described as a moment to show humility and service. In reality, it was nothing more than a setup. Claire called Emily forward, her voice polite but eyes sharp. "Emily, could you help us demonstrate a little tradition?" she said, glancing out at the crowd with a rehearsed smile. The guests murmured, shifting in their seats as two assistants appeared at Emily's side. Without waiting for her agreement, they led her to a marble pillar draped in fake gold ivy. Claire made some joke about sacrifice and family duty. Before Emily could protest, the assistants gently but firmly tied a soft sash around her wrists, binding her to the pillar. Phones came out right away, the blue glow of camera flashes making the moment seem less real and more like something staged for social media. Laughter rose through the crowd. Some people looked unsure, but most just recorded, eager to be part of whatever spectacle was unfolding. Emily stood as tall as she could, jaw set, refusing to show how close she was to breaking in front of everyone who had always tried to put her in her place. The silence that settled after the laughter faded was heavy and mean. Every second felt stretched, packed with judgment and the knowledge that, for the people here, her pain was little more than entertainment. Just as the tension in the hall seemed unbearable, the low rumble of an engine swept through the space, turning every head toward the big glass doors that led out to the garden. People began to murmur when a silver Mercedes slowly pulled up to the entrance, its polished body nearly glowing under the patio lights. For a second, the whole crowd forgot about Emily. Even Tyler and Claire stopped mid-sentence, their practiced calm slipping as they tried to figure out who could possibly arrive this late. When the driver's door opened, Derek, Emily's godfather, who'd spent years traveling the country and almost never came to family events, stepped out. He looked the same as always, tall, with an easy stride and a face that rarely gave anything away. Derek walked straight through the crowd, ignoring the way people tried to greet him, not slowing for anyone. There was a feeling in the air that something was shifting. Without a word, Derek reached Emily. He didn't ask questions or make a show out of it. Instead, with simple, steady hands, he undid the sash holding her to the pillar. He helped her stand, glanced over to make sure she was steady, and gave her a nod that said quietly, "You're not alone." For the first time that night, Emily felt seen and cared for, and it caught her off guard how much that simple gesture meant compared to everything else she had endured. Nobody in the room seemed prepared for what happened next. As soon as Emily was freed, Derek looked around at the stunned guests, his voice steady but louder than anyone expected. He said, "I want to make something clear to everyone here. Emily is my wife." For a second, there was nothing but pure silence. People stared, open-mouthed, a few clutching their phones like they might miss something even bigger. Even Tyler, usually quick to come up with excuses, looked completely caught off guard. Claire's expression froze, her usual smooth confidence now replaced with disbelief. Derek stood beside Emily, holding her hand with quiet certainty. His words repeated in everyone's mind, clear, final, leaving no space for doubt. Then, without a hint of anger or drama, he calmly asked the Harringtons to explain themselves. His gaze traveled around the group, settling on each face, waiting for someone to take responsibility for what had just happened. No one spoke up. Derek did not need to yell or threaten. There was something about his presence, about the way he carried himself, that made people listen. He told the crowd the family's time in that place was over, and nobody even tried to object. The room was full of people who were used to getting their own way, but all of them fell silent, unable to challenge someone who so clearly would not be pushed around. The shock in the room doubled when Derek reached into the inside pocket of his suit and pulled out a folder. He handed it to Claire, his movements patient, like he had been waiting for this moment. As Claire opened it and glanced through the paperwork, her hands trembled. Derek explained calmly and loud enough for everyone to hear that the old Riverside Hall was no longer in the Harrington family's name. He went on to say that, over the past several years, Emily had quietly saved the estate from bankruptcy, making sacrifices and taking on work that nobody else would do. With her own effort and careful planning, she had arranged for the property to be transferred to a new owner, Derek himself, at her request. Derek's steady voice carried across the hall as he laid out the details, making sure no rumor could blossom in confusion. As the truth set in, guests traded stunned glances. Even the oldest members of the Harrington family, people used to being in control of every situation, didn't seem to know what to say. For the first time ever, all eyes in the hall turned to Emily, not as a servant, not as a simple background player, but as the true force that had kept the family afloat. In that moment, her years of unrecognized hard work could not be hidden any longer, and everyone could see just how wrong they had been. Emily, now finally free from both the stairs and the ropes, stepped forward with a calm she had never felt before. For so many years, her voice had been just a whisper in the background, drowned out by others' demands. Tonight, in front of everyone who used to look right through her, she let her words ring out clear across the garden. She said that what had happened was not a scheme or some sneaky game. It was her way of saving something that meant a lot to everyone, even when no one else was willing to step up. She looked each of the Harringtons in the eye, her gaze steady, showing she had nothing to hide and nothing left to prove. Emily explained how she had worked late into countless nights, taking on jobs around town that no one thought she was doing, and quietly putting every dollar she earned toward keeping the family from losing their home. She reminded everyone that she had never wanted thanks or recognition, just kindness. The weight of past years, all that quiet ignoring and harsh judgment, seemed to fade with every word she spoke. This time, she was not that quiet girl who was easy to ignore. She stood fully on her own, showing she was stronger than anyone had ever guessed. Derek turned to face the guests, his voice not raised but carrying easily across the patio. He spoke openly about everything Emily had done over the years, the way she took care of other people's messes, how she cleaned up after parties no one thanked her for, and stretched every dollar to pay the heating bill when winter was rough. Derek, who had watched the Harringtons treat her like someone invisible, quietly listed the small and big sacrifices Emily made without getting a word of thanks or even a nod of acknowledgement. He looked right at those in the front row, people who prided themselves on family tradition and charity work, and pointed out the truth. They had let her carry their burdens while they kept their hands clean. As Derek spoke, the carefully kept image of the Harringtons, their community leadership, holiday card smiles, all the ways they tried to show they were a model family, suddenly cracked wide open. Nobody had a comeback. For once, nobody pulled out their phone. The shame in the air was thick. People stared at their shoes or shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to look Emily in the eye. The silence held the weight of realization. Now, those who had judged and dismissed her couldn't ignore Emily anymore. There was respect in their glances, but also discomfort, as they finally understood just how wrong they had been. As evening settled over the old Riverside Hall, something had changed about the place. The white columns and wide porch that used to feel so imposing now seemed stripped of their old importance. It was as if the years of fancy parties and whispered drama didn't matter anymore. What was left behind was just a big, empty space and the soft hum of the city in the distance. Derek, still calm and collected, gathered up the rope that had been used to tie Emily. He folded it up, carrying it out to the trash by the driveway, and tossed it in without a second thought. The rope's disappearance was a small thing, but it was the clear end to everything that had weighed Emily down for so long. Emily stood on the lawn, looking at the faces slowly drifting away as guests made quiet exits. She realized she did not feel bitterness or the need to celebrate. All she felt was a deep, quiet relief, like the pressure that had sat on her shoulders for year after year had finally lifted. The struggle was over. The Harringtons' old sense of control and pride had faded away, replaced by something calm and honest. Now, as the cool breeze moved through the garden, Emily was truly free for the first time in her life. Beneath the old wooden pergola at the edge of the garden, Emily and Derek sat side by side. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but here everything felt quiet and removed from the world. They leaned back, talking softly about how they had first crossed paths on a freezing January morning years ago, both looking for something that made sense when everything else felt upside down. In each other, they had seen the same stubborn hope and refusal to just settle for the life others had set out for them. Looking back now, it seemed almost funny how quickly trust had grown from simple, honest conversations late at night or over cheap takeout dinners. Tonight, sitting next to Derek, Emily wasn't worried about putting on a brave face or saying the right things. She realized that for the first time in her life, the silence between them didn't feel tense or awkward. It was comfortable, almost cozy, the kind of quiet where she felt truly herself. There were no more roles to play or chores to do just to keep the peace. As the night breeze drifted through the climbing roses overhead, Emily felt something new in her chest. It was hope, real hope, for a fresh start, one that belonged to her and Derek alone, with no old chains holding her back. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows as Emily wandered through the old riverside house. She moved from room to room, taking her time. The hallways, once echoing with judgment and whispers, now just felt quiet and ordinary. For so many years, every photo on the wall and every antique vase on a shelf had been reminders that she did not really belong here. But now, those things barely held any power over her. They were just objects, nothing more. The stiff family portraits, with their stern faces and hard eyes, made her pause for only a second before she turned away, barely noticing the names under the frames. Emily opened closets that used to be off-limits and glanced around bedrooms where she used to tiptoe, careful not to disturb anyone's peace. She realized she had no urge to hold on to keepsakes or cling to things just because they were expensive or old. Instead, she let go of what was never really hers, both in the house and in her heart. Standing in the wide entryway, she drew a deep breath and looked out at the busy street beyond the lawn. For the first time, the idea of the future excited her. It stretched out ahead, wide open and waiting for her to choose her own story. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Derek began making small changes around the old house. Not sweeping renovations, but bits and pieces that made it feel like somewhere they belonged. Simple things mattered most. They made breakfast together, with Derek burning toast and Emily laughing at him while the smell filled the kitchen. Evenings meant walks by the river or lazy hours on the porch swing. Nothing fancy, just real time spent together. The house slowly grew lighter, less like a monument to someone else's memories and more like their own place. One afternoon, Emily decided to clear out the stuffy old study. She moved the heavy desk against the wall and let sunlight pour in through the big windows. Paints and brushes soon covered every surface, and the sharp, clean smell of turpentine filled the air. Emily lost herself in painting, using bold colors that she had never dared to touch before. Each stroke across the canvas felt like tossing another bit of her old fears away. Derek would peek in from the hallway, teasing her about getting more paint on her shirt than on the mural, but always smiling at the joy in her work. Day by day, they turned the house into somewhere warm and alive, a place where Emily's dreams could finally take root. One morning, as Emily was sorting through some old mail in the kitchen, she noticed a formal envelope on the table. The return address was unmistakable. It was from the Harringtons. Instead of anxiety or anger, she just felt calm. She made herself a cup of coffee, took the letter out to the porch, and read the carefully worded message, an attempt at reconnecting, wrapped in apologies and offers to talk. Emily sat quietly for a while, soaking in the sunlight and thinking about how much had changed. When she finally wrote back, her response was short and honest. She thanked them for reaching out but made it clear she was moving forward on her own terms. With the letter, she included a photo she had painted of the river near the house. It was not a token of bitterness or challenge, just a simple symbol of the peace and freedom she had found. Emily felt no need to fight or reopen old wounds. She had let go and grown, and she hoped they might find their own peace as well. Life settled into a gentle rhythm. Emily woke each day and walked barefoot across the wooden floors, breathing in the fresh air, knowing there was nothing to hide from anymore. She filled the space around her with color, laughter, and the hope of new beginnings. The past was over, now she was the one deciding what her story would be.